All right, guys. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming out. Look, we got a full house tonight, Sheila.
Yay.
I want to thank all of y'all for taking time out of y'all's evenings to join us here, and I'm really excited to get into this conversation. We're here with Dr. Sheila Newsom, and it's been an amazing journey so far, just the short time that we've known each other, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your story and how we got here tonight. So let's do a brief introduction and kick it off.
Great. Thanks, Evan. Wow. Yeah, it has been a short journey, but, I think that's the one thing I've found about working in this realm, that the psychedelics, especially ketamine, especially Metis, seems to build bonds with it. There are a few folks that are in here that have experienced that as well, but I think that that's something that breaks down barriers. And, I think we're all in transition in some shape, form, or fashion.
Definitely.
I love that Thoreau line, and I think it's applicable. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation. And I think that's where we are. I think that's as a culture, and a lot is people. And there probably isn't anybody that sits in the room that doesn't have somebody that's not been touched by suicidality, and deep depression, and those things that, we just don't want to talk about. But that's the best thing, is that I think this sort of forum and what you're doing in the world is a platform, and I think that's it.
Likewise. Yeah, I think it's beautiful to see how people are stepping up in this time in history and serving one another.
Yeah.
And, it's definitely what brought us together.
Right.
You met me in a point of transition myself, and for a little bit of backstory of kind of how we got here. So I was originally born and raised here in Austin, Texas, and I joined the military almost straight out of high school, and left for about 6.5 years, and then I just got out of the Navy in October 2020. I was discharged, came back to Austin, saw the city was just booming, so much growth, and I knew that I wanted to be in the middle of it to, create a platform that could articulate, what has been special about this city for so long. And so I started this platform in order to just share stories of people, contributing to the culture here in Austin, and serving their communities in various ways. And, the array of people that I've met through that process has been incredible. And I'm so thankful to be sitting here, all the various stages. And when Sheila and her team approached me with this concept, I knew that there was just a sense of, responsibility and ultimately respect for the topic, and to move forward in that direction. I knew that it was definitely something that needed to be done and had to be done, and I think that's the parallels that I'm seeing, in your story and mine, and that's why I felt so comfortable with you along the way. I think there's a big barrier here with this topic specifically, and there's a lot of various different approaches out there, and I think the key is to meet people where they're at and to open that door slowly and make sure that people are comfortable, because this is medicine and it can be used as such. And for me, coming out of the military with, physical, mental, emotional, some would call them traumas or whatever, just patterns for sure, and getting tossed back into the world, that is such a unique state of transition. And when I found out you were a vet yourself, and we shared what those environments were like, and the type of men and women they shape you to be, it doesn't necessarily fit in the civilian world, as we would call it. So I came back to Austin and started my business, hit the ground running. And all of last year, I think I had such a need to express myself creatively that I didn't necessarily get in the military. When I came home, there was no stopping. And, you know, I shook every hand, went to every meeting, went to every party, you know, planned events, started my podcast, started the business, and it just led to more and more burnout. And along the way, as I reintegrated to the life I knew, you know, prior to the military, where I was 18, 19 years old, growing up in Austin, I realized how many skills I didn't have or I had in my heart that I just hadn't been using. And, you know, I'm a very task-oriented individual. I love goals. I love chasing things. And I think that's a common story with a lot of people in our culture and society. And so this process for me and what Sheila has given me was the opportunity to sit down in our initial consultation. And when she approached me, I made sure that I wanted to go through the process as a typical patient would in order to truly understand what the process was so that we could open up about what that process was like throughout this interview. And so Sheila was gracious enough to do an initial consultation with me and then provide 3 separate ketamine journeys facilitated by her, and that's what we'll touch on today. And what that experience was like and how it's helped me, but also broad scope, you know, what the impact of that is in today's culture.
Well, I mean, nobody would know that Evan's only 26, going on about 52.
Now that I shaved, it's a little more apparent.
And, you know, there's a deeper story there about warrior. And I think that the thing that, so a little bit about my backstory that I think intersects with a lot of the things that we're talking about. I was born and raised in West Texas, had lovely parents, both sets of grandparents lived a block away. You know, I was showered with a background of golden child, so I was very, very fortunate, encouraged at every point. I spent a year at A&M, and then my mother sent me a article of the Big Spring Daily Herald when I was middle of my freshman year at A&M.
Big Spring.
And it was about going to West Point, and I don't know, something shifted. So it was a calling, and I think we both know what those callings mean. So I applied, got accepted to West Point, and I loved my 4 years there. I just loved every aspect about it. You know, there was tradition, there was ethos, there was friendship, there was the military background, but the intellectual part was wonderful as well. But the friendships. But the other thing that I did find out there is that nobody comes through those gates without being called. So fast forward, I served 4 years in Italy as a paratrooper after graduation, and then came back and was a little lost and survived a year of partying here in Austin, and then again, another article out of the paper my mother had sent, and so I wound up going to medical school in Galveston. Did medical school there, did long years of training in Lubbock, married my wife, who was 9 years behind me, but also from Big Spring, professional singer, and so we did all the training stuff, and then I started practice in Lubbock and practiced there for 15 years, then moved to Midland, Odessa, and continued practice there. Went over, did several missions in Uganda, and fell in love with Uganda. 2011, we had somebody that wanted to buy us out and paid us a lot of money. So I was able to, by that time we had moved here, and I'd moved back. I went back and forth for work for a while, and then bottom line is that had enough to retire. So I spent time in Africa for about a year, started a company there to making some grain supplements for protein supplements for children there, and using the local grains, and then began to really take off there, and thought I'd spend, probably half my time in Africa and half my time here. I was loving it. Both my girls, spent time over there, and were changed by it. But my life, and then my wife also found a lovely retirement home in the West Indies, and so we were fortunate enough to buy a home in the West Indies. So, I mean, the only thing that I can tell you that interrupted that was when I was 42. I realized that the way that I was coping with pain, with death and dying was not going to work, and I went to treatment for drugs and alcohol for 6 months in 1993.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've been sober since. So, I mean,
Amazing.
that was a real gift. It saved my life, saved my marriage, saved my family. But the thing is that sitting there with all of that behind me on the porch in Nevis in 2013, I hear a voice. And the voice says, "Sheila, you're a woman, always have been, and there's work to do." And so that's really kind of the beginning of this life story, is that I heard something and I answered it, and I struggled with it. I mean, I really struggled with it because I knew that it would cause a lot of pain and trauma within my own family. Had 2 girls who I dearly love, a wife that I have 30 plus years who I'm deeply in love with, and there was something that called to the heart that was hard to ignore. And so I fought it for a couple of years, and finally went back to Nevis in 2015 and had a clear plan for committing suicide. And I mean, I knew we had the insurance policy and this and that, and it was going to be a bloody transition, and not many people were willing to go. So, I stood out underneath the moon one night and just said, "Hey, whoever is here and whoever was behind that voice, this is kind of it for me." And I got something else that said to me, "Hey, you do what you want to.
Mm-hmm.
This is your choice. This is your life. But there are people that you could help that will not be helped if you go through with this."
Right.
So at that point, I made a decision to begin to fully transition. Fast forward to 2018, we had my oldest daughter's wedding in Nevis, and that was the last time that I was Gary. And after that, I changed my name to Sheila Grace and began to fully transition. But that was the last time my family saw me as father, as a male figure. And so it was a big transition for all of us. But what I can say is that I went for facial surgery in Boston in September of 2018. That was about 10 hours of surgery, and I woke up from that and I heard the voice again. "Sheila, good job. You're on the right path." So there were little snippets along the way. 2018, I had breast augmentation here. Then I did vocal surgery in May, and then I started a 2-year-long master's program in depth psychology because I really wanted to try to figure out what all this was about.
Wow.
I had some dreams during all of this, but in May of this year, I had a dream, and it was very clear. It was military. I was getting called up, and I knew that it was time for me to get out. And so instead of doing a PhD, I finished in August. And then it came to me kind of, in the same way. It was kind of a mystical revelation. Okay, Metis. Metis is the goddess of wisdom of the Greek tradition. And I thought, okay, that sounds right. And then I'd been introduced to ketamine because I'd had a recurrence of suicidality, and it had taken that off the table. So, I mean, I knew those two things came together, and something resonated, and I thought, well, nobody's doing this by going to the home. There's a lot of clinics that are offering ketamine. The Psychedelia is, sweeping the nation, and I thought, I think this is a way in. So in the last 6 months, I've fortunately had the opportunity to work with people like you, several people here in the audience, and the things that I am being taught in that space are things that are about healing. Mm-hmm. And I think the way that we've set this up is an aspect of the healing that maybe we've overlooked. And I think my take home to all of this, and I think that's what you and I have talked about several times, is that between the healer and the recipient, the healed, there's an energetic. And physicians, shamans have always known this. There's an exchange of energy between the two. And in the middle of that space is a consciousness. Mm-hmm. And so what I do think in my own experience and with the people that I've worked with that are in this room, that between me and them, there is something that intervenes. And it's just me providing that and an awareness mm-hmm. of this that seems to have in its effect. So the metis, or the consciousness of that medication with the individual psyche, is, I think, where the healing occurs.
Yeah.
There's some brain stuff that goes on with that, and I know that, and that's where we're doing all the studies. But the other part of it is there's a soul that's involved with this as well.
Yeah. Well, there's so many different chapters to that story, and I just want to give it up for you being here and taking all those different steps to be right here right now. I'm inspired by so many different aspects of that story, but the first thing that struck a chord was that you're a West Point graduate, go off to Italy to be a paratrooper, which are highly prestigious in themselves, and like that's just the beginnings of an individual who was pursuing high expectations and you followed through with it, and to develop your medical practice in that sense. And you said 20 years or 30 years that was your medical practice.
30, yeah.
Yeah, 30 years, and then to have that moment to where you're met with more, like near retirement, and it's saying, oh, I'm not done yet, but I've done all these things. And for that call to be that clear and that tough of a call, to where you had that internal resistance, but you knew that you had to go with it because that's what you had always done.
Well, I mean, and I appreciate the way you frame that. There was a lot of work I had to do.
Definitely.
There was a lot of work that still needed to be done, and
it still is.
It still is, but after we sold that dialysis center, in retrospect, what I really mm-hmm. understood was that there was a real large part of me that was full of hubris, and the Greek gods hated hubris because mm-hmm. the Titans were all moved by hubris. That's right. What they lived for. And so it took me a couple of years, and I think maybe an aspect of this whole transition into what I've moved into was about shaving me down to the right size. Mm-hmm. That's what amazes me with somebody like you. I've got a daughter in the audience who's same age, and the ability to be right-sized, I'd gotten too big mm-hmm. someplace up here.
Right.
And so I think that if we listen to those life voices, that if we're fortunate, that we get brought down to the right size. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I think. I think I was just really, really lucky to survive till I got to the point where I could at least hear those voices.
Sure. Yeah, I think there was, I left high school originally, went to SEAL training straight out of high school. And, through that process, I put my mind and my body through hell. And there's a series of events that life was resetting me the hard way.
Yeah.
And physically I paid the price. And the less I listened, the more it hurt. And, there are various ways of coping with that, and still to pursue higher and higher achievements. There becomes this distant, void within ourselves of what we're trying to achieve and what we're actually capable of. And that can be a painful process. To really reset and listen more instead of, trying to just, set your will on the world. I think then you start to get clarity. And it sounds like there was a very definite moment in your life where that came. I'm interested, as you went through life and you achieved all of these things, for me, like, there's always more. What did it feel like that for you, where there was always something else? There was always more, billet to fill. And was there a part of yourself that was missing, or was this, transition later in life just completely, did it blindside you?
Wow, that's well, here's my take on that. I mean, obviously there was. I mean, there was a part that was unfulfilled. Odd thing happened, 2002, in a hotel room and on a trip. I'm going to close the door. I look on the bed. There's a woman. There is a woman with her back turned toward me, and she looks at me. And I'd never had a waking dream of that nature. And I had been sober then for almost 10 years. And so it wasn't a matter of drugs or alcohol. But I mean, I saw somebody as clearly as I see anybody here in the front. And I had no idea what that was. 2019, during an exercise for my master's program, I'll look into the mirror and I realized that the face that I was looking at was the face of that image in 2002.
Wow.
So, the universe works in really odd ways, and I think that's what we're reaffirming with psychedelics, especially with ketamine, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the thing is that how can an image have a valence, have a charge to it that lives itself forward through me?
Sure.
So obviously, there had to be some agreement at some deep level that I was unaware of, and I call that the soul level. I mean, that's the only thing that it can be, to move that forward. So there obviously was something that wanted to happen through me that may or may not have had anything to do with what was going on up here.
Yeah, and I think that's usually the case, and that I've lived that as well. As the farther and farther I get off of my path, and the more I put my head down. Like I said, life has a harsher and harsher way of resetting me to being in alignment, to being on my path. And for someone to just continue along their path and numb themselves to the call of the world coming at you in all these various ways, I think it's a very common story that a lot of us know. And typically that is drugs and alcohol. And I think it's amazing that, you have that past as well, as painful as it may have been, or as hard as those lessons were to learn. I think there is a reason that you went through that, and now you're in the position to, serve others this medicine in, a responsible manner, and to open that door for so many different types of people. Whether, it's the veteran or, the individual going through transition or dealing with any type of, shadows in their world that can be turned towards light. you know, for us to meet each other there and serve one another and open those doors and let each other know that's okay, to truly be yourself. I mean, I couldn't think of anything better in this world to do and a better way to serve humanity. Now actually developing the tools and putting yourself in the place to do that, that's another story. And I'm so excited to see that, you know, continue. And there's so many different individuals approaching this in different ways. And I think what's incredibly unique about, you know, the space that you're creating is that the fact that you're going to people mostly by word of mouth or recommendations with relationships that you've already established. The first meeting we had was a Zoom call where I got to meet you for the first time. And from the very moment that I started to hear your story and how you developed your practice, I knew that it was, you know, safe for me to completely open up and reframe all the different things I'd put myself through, the stages of life, the expectations. I really took a look at it in a way that I never had before, and we did that in 45 minutes. And, you know, I just like walked out of the room after that call, and I felt like already just a weight had been lifted. And we hadn't even began working with the medicine yet. Right. And so the first session we scheduled about a week later. Yeah. And we actually did it here in this space. At the time, I had couches in these front 2 rows, and I had put months and months and months of work into this space. And I knew that I had really created just a pure encapsulation of my heart and my mind, and a space that I was proud that I could watch people walk in, and, you know, whether it was who I was interviewing or those in attendance, I could tell that this space put people at ease a little bit. And that's why I chose the name Listening Room and Studio first, because I think this is a space where people begin to listen. Something about the soundproofing kind of like drops your guard as far as, you know, removing the stimulation. And, you know, for me to put my heart and soul into this room, building it, I thought it would be really interesting to utilize the medicine in here in this space that I had spent countless hours in and had become very comfortable with. But that isn't to say that this isn't where I do business. This isn't, you know, to say that this isn't where I work. Yeah. And so going into that first session, you know, I put on my own music. Sheila came in, she, you know, read my astrological chart, which was super interesting to hear about. And then, you know, she said, "Do you have any questions?" And, you know, she guided me through it. And I remember her saying, "Just say yes and choose love." And for me, she didn't need to say anything else. That was going to be my mantra going into this session. And so we did the medicine intramuscularly, and I laid back on the couch, and she said that the medicine would kick in at about 3 minutes. And I mean, 3 minutes on the dot, it just opened up. And I was aware of where I was in the space. I could feel that I was familiar with the room, but this eternal blackness opened up around me, and I just felt held. And then it went away, and I just fell. And I just started falling for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It felt like eternity. And I was like, well, I don't really want to fall the whole time. So I'm going to start like kind of intervening here. And so it was just in that moment, I kind of fell onto this like roller coaster, and my body just stayed in the laid down position that I was in. But it was interesting because I was going through this roller coaster, and it was smooth, and, you know, it had its rise and fall. And I kept thinking about various relationships in my life, and I would go up to each relationship and they would appear like shoulder to head high, just massive, beings in this space, this black matter. And I would check in with them and I would just say, hey, like, is there any issues here? Is there anything I can do better? Is there any tension? Is there any way I could show up differently? And it was very interesting because there were several relationships where I thought there were issues and there weren't any, or I just saw clarity immediately on how I needed to show up a little differently, just a little different approach. There were other, relationships where I thought everything was perfect, and I checked in with them, and there was definitely some things I needed to work on. But a lot of it was work and relationship focused. And I realized that this was an introduction to the space. I enjoyed it, but everything that I confronted that day in that first session in this space was already on my heart and mind. So it was things I was already subconsciously aware of, and I knew I could go deeper if I did a better job of clearing my energy and, confronting these things on my own and utilizing these sessions in with a more capacity to go deeper and a more expansive manner than just what's going on in my everyday life. So the second session we did in here again. And this time I took about a day and a half prior to the session off of work, tried to get off my phone as much as possible. That day I woke up, went for a walk on Town Lake. I'm definitely, I like to work out a lot. Definitely had a past of, relying on that and beating my body up. So I thought I'd try a new approach and just go for a walk instead of like a 10-mile run. And then I stretched, I journaled, and I tried to just sit with it all day and just prepare for the session. And that time was really interesting because second session, the space just opened up for me. And I think that the medicine was just trying to teach me how small I really was and how big, this universe or, this existence really is. It just wanted to show me how vast so that I would stop focusing on such minute and surface level stuff. And, that second session I went much, much deeper. And then the third session, we moved to my girlfriend's house, and it's a great space, and it was a sunny afternoon, and Sheila met me there and started a fire and was on the couch. And that session, because it wasn't here, it wasn't work related, it wasn't in this space, it was much, much different. The energy had shifted. But I knew that every session I was going deeper and deeper and deeper. And that session was special to me. The way you read me that poem prior. Right. And, each time I go in to this space now, I realize that, it's really, really just the way to open the gate. It's a great way to gain awareness of where you are. But there's still a lot of work to be done. Yeah. The interesting thing was each session I did, I would sit up and I'd feel so good about the way I saw this or that, or, I had the solution to this, that, and then the funny thing is that, as the drug would wear off and as I would get a few days outside of the experience, what I was so sure of became less and less clear. And that's really where I would start to ask the questions and look from an honest, approach of, this is what I experienced and this is how I can integrate it and this is how I can be better. So I think it's definitely important to say that, this is a great, great way to, be introduced and gain clarity of, what you are and how expansive that can be. But it's not a cure-all, and there's a lot of work that has to follow and it shouldn't be relied on. Ultimately you have to rely on yourself. But this is just an amazing piece to the puzzle that's becoming more and more prominent and available.
Well, I mean, I don't think you could have framed it any better, Evan. I mean, that tells my story of what the story is about the mechanics. The two things that I do use for an intake that's a little bit different is that I do an astrology chart.
Mm-hmm.
And about 20 years ago, a physician mentor reminded me that Jung had done hand charts on all of his patients the last several years of his life, and he said, it's probably not a bad thing for you to learn. So I started learning astrology way back, mainly because of Jung, having no idea about going forward with a master's or PhD. But the other thing is that I do a typology test to kind of to determine what, and I think the best thing to relate is Myers-Briggs is kind of what we think of in those terms. The thing is that, and we're talking about consciousness. So consciousness, to my way of thinking, is just simply a reflective awareness that we're capable of. And it seems to have a lot to do with those images that we were talking about, and the images that we run into in that other world of psychedelia. But what I do know is that each of us has 4 major functions that we articulate that consciousness with, and it's feeling and thinking and sensing and intuition. And all of us have those, and all of us have them in an extroverted form, where we point out to the world, and an introverted form in which the world points it back to us. The thing is that our culture is full and shaped, and has been for the last several hundred years, by those with sensation and thinking and extroverted behind them. So it shapes the way that we see everything. And yet there are 16 different personality types. So if you're not a sensing, thinking person, or don't have those as your major functions, then that leaves you with intuition and feeling. And so think about it. What were we told in the military from the first? You don't want to feel anything. Don't feel anything. But the thing that that's interesting, and I've just learned this in the last 6 months in working through this, is that if you take the top 4 functions, those are the functions that 2 of those we primarily use. The other 2 are a little bit distant, but we still use those from the ego perspective. There's a barrier between those that are conscious and those that are unconscious. And those unconscious functions are the ones that we project on other folks.
And we all have them.
And we all have them. The thing is that if I know what type you have, I know that the thing that Metis tends to work on is the function that guards the gate. So all I really need to know if that function, which Jung called anima and animus, and an aspect of the soul. So thinking of it in those terms, is it looking outwards or is it looking inwards? And so anybody that has an extroverted thinking and sensation function is looking inward with the soul. And those that are introverted are looking out. So it's a good way for me to help people guide their images going in, knowing this, and I can say perhaps it's going to be a little bit more difficult because you're looking inward with the thing, what you're looking for, you're looking with. And that's what my point, I think, needs to be, is seeing what images want to come through that barrier between conscious and unconscious. The thing is that a portal gets opened between conscious and unconscious. And I think that's exactly what the psychedelics do, is that they open those portals. Now, what we're looking at, how far we go down, what we're led to, that's a great mystery.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a universe that's down there. And that's what I'm saying, that for a long time in our society, all that we've said was whatever we see is the only thing that's real. I don't know how many of you have seen Dune, but one of the things that I was so taken by is that Duncan Idaho, the warrior, the consummate warrior, says to Paul Atreides, Paul says, "I'm having dreams." Duncan Idaho turns to him and says, "Hey, anything that's real is done while you're awake." Mm. And that's what I think that we're working against right now in the world of psychedelia is that, no, I mean, I thought that way for a long time and lived that way for a long time. But the thing is, there's a whole universe that's down there. And those are the things that tend to come up in our dreams. And we tend to project them on other folks, and they show up in our face.
Yeah.
So I think that the psychedelics, and especially ketamine, and especially metis, offers a portal into that realm. What I'm learning about is that I think that what I need to do in the future is to help people with each type develop a way of working with that anima and animus figure in order to make things more coherent.
Sure.
And I think that's what's going to happen as we go further. But, you know, the people that are at doing clinics, you know, mm-hmm. where they start IVs and do IV ketamine, there's an anti-inflammatory process with ketamine. And so it helps people just from that perspective. There's neuroplasticity that is encouraged. So there's new pathways that the brain is able to form. So, I mean, I think that's helpful. We know that in some remarkable fashion that ketamine in any shape, form, or fashion seems to take suicide off the table. Mm-hmm. How could that be? And I don't know. But the other part about it is that I've seen it before, because when I walked into AA, they said, okay, we know that you've nearly killed yourself on multiple occasions, and all you have to do is just give a little bit of energy to the question that there may be something else larger than you out there. And that's the only thing that was asked of me when I went to treatment. The other stuff that went with that in the 12-step program, all that is about forming a consciousness and about getting in a habit of doing a day-to-day thing. And it's a daily reprieve based on the maintenance of a spiritual condition, a consciousness.
Sure.
So, you know, I think to come full circle, we're in the very first part of psychedelia. What I hope we don't do, though, is I hope we don't think our way in and think that's the only way that these drugs are helping us. Because I think there's a deeper level that involves something more than thinking. I think this is more than a brain issue. I think it's an issue of the conscious and unconscious and the psyche, and not just the brain. But if we don't watch out, we'll treat the psychedelics just like we did Prozac. And I remember in the early 1990s, I remember the headline, Prozac Nation. You know, if you fill in that with Psychedelic Nation, you know, in some of the places that we're looking these days, it's the same thing. Yeah. And we're channeling not only use, but sales and the future. And government regulation goes hand in hand with that. We do need to have this regulated, but we also need to understand that we're dealing with something that's extremely potent and not just involving brain.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's where we take it back to where we started this conversation, is that, you ultimately we need to approach this with a sense of responsibility and respect for the space. I think it's incredibly interesting that ketamine is so readily available now because of its prior medical use through Vietnam as a disassociative anesthetic. And for that, I think that says so much about the state that you're in, is to become disassociated in a way from your sense of self. And whether you want to think about a out-of-body experience or just an observation of self as something greater, I think that's incredibly healing. And I would think there's a lot of ways for us to reach that state, but ultimately that's where we want to live. Is from the heart, observing ourselves as something greater than ourselves, serving some greater purpose. I think there's something so vital about having a sense of purpose in this world. And I get the impression that's something that you've always been chasing and stepped up into, and I think there's a lot of people like that. I've been looking for that my whole life.
Well, and Evan, I mean, you've articulated again so well. What I've been taught and what I really am coming to see is that we all know that all of us have an ego, and the ego is responsible for determining what we eat, how we drive, what we're going to do tomorrow. But the ego comes out of a larger entity, and that's the self. And you can call it God or Goddess or Buddha, whatever. But the first 7 to 8 years of life, that's what the ego is trying to do, is establish itself separate from this. Mm-hmm. There's a tie that's there that's eternal, that is never, ever broken. But the thing is that some of us get further away from this, either from trauma or from decisions or from drugs and alcohol, and this thing begins to develop a life of its own. And it has a charge to it. There's a valence. There's a power to this, and it attracts these other things, more trauma, more complexes around this. And this thing begins to think that it runs everything that this is. Mm-hmm. And so what I do know is that with ketamine, especially, that the charge of this valence around this ego is diminished. So I have, and there are several people in here that have told me this, is that I feel lighter. I feel like I'm connected to something after that first session.
Sure.
And the way that I see that happening is that there's a reestablishment of that bond between something else larger and the ego can finally see itself in relation to this. And so it gets right-sized. Mm-hmm. Now, how long and how does it stay right-sized? And that's that day-to-day stuff. And it may be a certain pattern of dosing, and we're still trying to work that out. But what I do know is that probably 3 to start off with is a good foundation. Mm-hmm. And then every 2 weeks for another month, and then monthly after that. That seems to be a pattern in my patients that mm-hmm. seems to be working.
As far as keeping people open?
Keeping people open, and that whatever the complexity, whatever is going on in psyche for healing gets established in that first 6 months. Then I'm offering, I think the best next step is troche, mm-hmm. and that's the sublingual portion, and it takes people into that space. But I think you've got to have a foundation, either IV or IM, in order to have that more fully. Mm-hmm. I don't think that you can get there. I don't think you get there in the same way without that container being constellated.
Sure.
Now, that may not be true, but I mean, that's what I'm seeing in my folks.
Yeah, I definitely see that. And I think it's that, like you said, developing that container or trust that you can go deeper. And it's that sense of familiarity that you get out of that. I've been utilizing psychedelics for years now, even through my time in the military, both psilocybin and LSD for me, changed my life and brought me so much healing and awareness of the way I needed to show up in the world, and the ability to learn what intuition was, right, and stop acting from the head and stop chasing myself down this rabbit hole that was completely defined by my ego, right, and pride and desire to do something worthy, and as soon as and that is my instinct still to this day. This entire process for me is learning how to open up, learning how to be more compassionate and open. My instincts are just to put my head down and run through brick walls, and I won't stop. But that's not sustainable. And, I've been practicing, meditation, journaling, yoga has been incredibly healing for me. A lot of these states that I've ventured to with and without psychedelics all it's done for me is just, sometimes I get lucky and I observe that space where there is something greater. And the more often that I can get myself to that space, the healthier I feel, the more open I feel. There's more exchange between, me and the world on an energetic level. I feel like I radiate energy more, powerfully with that awareness. And whether I'm, closing my eyes and breathing and honing in on that presence, or I go months and months, off of those, habits or practices, and I feel anxious, like I can't get it right, or the world's just beat me down. And I realize that ultimately I have the power to flip that switch by implementing the right habits. And, just gaining the awareness that, like you said to me in my first session, that, based on your chart, like your life is a meat grinder, and it's just the way it's going to be. And that brought me a lot of assurance that, I wasn't doing something wrong. It's just the way it was going to be.
Yeah.
And, I've thought about that a lot since, and nothing's changed. It's still a meat grinder. But I am coming out more tender and delicious along the way. No, I'm just playing. But no, I think I'm so thankful, to have opened this door and found out, about your practice. And I just want to be clear on, how much peace this has brought me, and healing already, just here in a few months. And I look forward to continuing on that path with you and in other ways, and just continuing to ask myself how I can serve. And I think you're doing the same. And I think it'll inspire many in this world to ask, themselves how they can show up and do the work, as common as that saying has become. But it's incredibly important right now. And I do want to say that, I think you're right, that, there is this battle between conscious and unconscious. And I don't necessarily see it as this hierarchy of one versus the other. Yeah. But what gives me some assurance, and I try to lean more towards the side of optimism than pessimism, because there's plenty of that these days. That's the easy thing to do. Yeah. But to be optimistic and say, hey, look, what I know to be true, maybe it's because I grew up in Austin, Texas. I know that authenticity is recognizable. I know that naturally people gravitate towards it, and it doesn't matter what system or structure thinks they're on top. Yeah. Ultimately, what's good in this world will come out on top. And, to paraphrase, there's a reading, in this book that I always quote. It's Shambhala. And, he starts the book talking about how dark this world can be and how it's always been that way. And there have been people that have, stood their ground and fought. And then there's people that took to the mountains and started farms and fed the population. And both are essential to this world. One isn't more right than the other. But I think that, true healing in this world comes from each and every person being able to embody both of those, ways of showing up, as far as, peaceful warriors on a battlefield for just prosperity and healing. I think there's a lot of warriors out here.
And I mean, I know you had the same platoon sergeant, but I remember the mind over matter. I don't mind and you don't matter. And I think that was the way that, a lot of us get introduced to, life as a warrior. And how many of us, have spent life as warriors? I think there's one deep mystery in all of this, though, that you just can't explain, and that's grace. I mean, there is something in all of this that is unexplicable, that puts these things together in this synchronous way. And whatever religion you call that, it is this aspect of grace.
Yeah, it's a great reminder.
That's the thing that I want to always leave the door open for, because, for 42 years of my life, I thought I could think my way in to all of this. And I realized I couldn't think my way into this way of living. I had to live my way into this way of thinking. And I think that's what grace does, is that it opens our eyes to something larger. And you're right. I mean, science today is telling us, quantum mechanics tells us, we are part of the force. We are part of something, but we're fields of probability, and we bump into each other in different ways. But those with that consonance, the resonance that is attractive, those people, and you feel those people, and, you gravitate to those people.
Definitely.
And that's the thing that I'm hopeful that we can do with the psychedelics. And the best thing is to take the things off the table that are destructive and help construct ways in which people can build on that and come out on the other side with the tools to lead more joyous lives.
Yeah, and embody that and demonstrate that for others. Thank you, Sheila. Well, I think we'd like to open this up to the crowd and introduce some questions tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this mic out. But if anybody would like to ask a question, just go ahead and raise your hand.
I'm always down for questions.
Of course you are.
Thank you so much. That was very insightful on both parties and explaining your experience and your life experience, bringing us to this point. So how did you settle on the 3 times of doing this? Like, what was sort of that trial and error and coming up with that?
Okay. Thanks, Mindy. They began to really work on ketamine as far as a helpful medication in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Once they figured out that the psychedelic experience was actually the thing that was doing the healing. So Stephen Levine at NYU has done an extensive amount of studies, and YouTube, you can find Stephen Levine every place. But their initial protocol, nobody knows what the best way of using this stuff is, but they did 3 in a week. And so that's, basically what I used as a pattern, is seeing what their pattern was to begin with and trying to mimic that. And so what I've been able to kind of figure out is that, I had volunteers, and I said, okay, can we do 3 in a row? Can we do 3 days in a row? We can. I've seen that time and again. Can we do 3 in a week? Yeah, we can. Can we do 3 in 2 weeks? Yeah. But what I am finding, and based upon Levine's work at NYU in 2008, 9, and 10, is that 3 seems to be the best way of getting that induction started. Now, what the best follow-up is for that, again, I kind of patterned off theirs, and you can do 2 weeks or 4 weeks, and do multiple months, and there's no right answer to any of that. And so the good thing is that now I'm being asked to participate in some studies to go along with this, so that we can verify, we can write articles, have peer-reviewed journals to verify and get those checks on the wall, but also to compare with other people. And there are thousands of us out here that are trying to figure out in this realm what works and what doesn't. The good thing is, though, is that this is a dissociative anesthetic that doesn't have cardiac or respiratory suppression. That's why, and it's class 3. That's why I feel so comfortable about never being cavalier about it, but at least about approaching people about using it in settings that you wouldn't typically think of, for a medication. But I treat it with respect, and I think that's the best way of approving it. But to answer your question, Levine and all the studies that were done at NYU are what I used as a pattern.
Yeah, there's something that comes up for me too about ketamine specifically, is that, I think it's interesting to see how all of these providers, these thousands of people in this country, you got MAPS, you've got all these, individuals working really hard to make this more readily available for the consumer, both on a monetary level and, just a lifestyle level. Like, what is the format? How do we want to fit this in? Is it, at home where you're going into someone's space? Is it on the commute? Is it inside of the health clinic? What is the best set and setting? And I think what's unique about yours is that, you're going to people in their space that they are comfortable in, and you're meeting them where they are. It's not some white-walled physician's clinic. And I see people, trending more towards set and setting. Yep. And I think ketamine is definitely the first step on that list, to opening other doors, whether it's psilocybin or whatever comes down the road. Everybody and their mother knows somebody that's going down to the jungle right now to do ayahuasca. Not all of us have 2 weeks to take off, and I'm not saying that that doesn't, a great amount of work that is very enlightening in itself, but it's just not a reality for everybody. Yep. So the fact is that this is getting more and more available. It's going to open that door for more and more people, and I'm excited to see, with the excessive information that's out there, is this something that insurance could cover, because people should have access to tools for mental health. It should be our top priority.
And I don't think, we're never going to look at mental health in the same way. Mm-hmm. That landscape has changed.
Well, especially post-pandemic.
Especially.
Yeah.
And, it's funny how life kind of puts us into the creases that make us learn the most quickly. Mm-hmm. And what could you think of but a pandemic in order to put us into a space where we are facing all of our worst nightmares. Yeah. But that's happened.
Well, a lot of us did that this year, with or without the assistance. Yeah. These substances are something that can just kick that door open and get you there a little quicker, and that has to be respected. But that isn't to say that you can't, reach these states, without substances, whether, you want to go be a monk on a mountaintop and remove yourself from stimulation, or sit in your apartment for weeks and weeks on end. I think all of us dealt with that isolation in different ways, but I think ultimately what came out of that pause will affect humanity for good, because people removed themselves from the rat race. They took a step outside of themselves and the patterns that they were just stuck in. Yes. And, just that slight pause and state of observation push people in a lot better direction as far as, what they were caring about, or what they, how they wanted to show back up, in the world, or, you know, whether they wanted to be around friends and family again, or how much they appreciated the ability to eat out. You know, it's super important that we don't forget that.
The other thing is, Evan, I mean, I think what we're also learning in this space is that there are a lot of different protocols that we'll move toward. I mean, I do know from my own use of ayahuasca and ibogaine and now ketamine that each of those seems to have a different teacher. So what I'm hopeful is that we'll have a broad enough base in order to work from to help determine what's the best way of using several of these together in order to promote a maximum healing or sustaining a sense of healing as we go forward. And that's the great thing is that if we can keep this open and safe, then I think that we're moving into a realm of healing and mental health that has been, 50 years ago. There are two state hospitals, worst two state hospitals in the state of Texas, and I lived in one in Big Spring, and it's still there. But they put alcoholics and drug addicts in one wing and locked them up. And then the people with schizophrenia and other disease processes, they put them in another. But there wasn't much to do. And I talked with somebody the other day that their parent had a lobotomy. Well, that's what you did for schizophrenia. I trained in Galveston, and we did shock therapy on everybody. Mostly if they had deep depression or whatever. But the thing is that we're doing with ketamine what shock treatment was back then.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is I think there are ways of working with all of this if we can just survive the first phase. Where there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be a lot of misuse, disuse. But if we're well-intended and we police ourselves and we're able to generate the right sort of studies to verify this, then we can move into helping the veteran, PTSD, the transgender with suicidality, and the deep depression. And anybody that sits in this room that's had any one of those things know. I mean, you can't get out of the bed sometimes.
Well, I think that's the majority, and that's the changing of the guard. Is that's becoming more and more talked about, and people aren't isolating the way they used to. And I'm excited to see this, become more readily available, and the introduction of group settings, and just people opening up. It's great. Any other questions? Justin.
Hi. I'm just really grateful to be here. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Sheila, for sharing today. I've had an opportunity to be on your show and was grateful for that opportunity. And then, Sheila, I just wanted to thank you because, I went to treatment for substance use disorder or addiction. I got out on December 23rd. And so you were helping my partner, who I want to marry, with ketamine therapy, and it was profound and great for her or Amy. And I was going to ask a question, though, out of curiosity. And one of the things I was going to say, though, is when you were helping her, you spoke just life into me and really encouraged me on my journey. And so it deeply impacted me. And I'm very, very grateful for that. Also, your story and sobriety. The question I had out of curiosity, and I do have great respect for this, I was an oxy addict who's had 2 suicide attempts, who has PTSD, childhood trauma, different things like that. And then from that, I believe addiction formed. And so I went to treatment the first time, May 15th of 2020. And when I got out of there, I didn't pick up oxy again. And maybe a real deal addict to marijuana and all sorts of other things. But I think I started trying the psychedelic space so heavily, hoping for a magic pill for that, hoping for healing. And I think I did have very powerful profound experiences. But after ayahuasca, I relapsed immediately and went off, disappeared on everyone for a long time. And after some other psychedelics, same story. I did do the ketamine therapy through a clinic, and I didn't have any suicidality in the relapses, which I am grateful for that. But for a guy like me, or someone that might be not just a moderate user or a hard user, but an actual addict, alcoholic, how can this either bring healing, or how do they not step into that? Because I know it has effects on trauma.
And it does. And I'm so glad you're clean and sober.
Yeah, 60 days.
Yeah.
Thank you. Or 61 yesterday. Yeah.
And I think that is a big question in a lot of people's minds. I have 29 years next week.
Congratulations.
Wow.
Same as yours, day at a time.
Yeah.
Based on the maintenance of a spiritual condition. And I think that's my answer to your question. I had to struggle with this a lot. Ayahuasca, ibogaine, all of those were things that I brought to sponsors, other people with experience in that realm, psychiatrists, and said, hey, how is this going to affect my sobriety? What was interesting, though, what came back to me and what my experience is in this, set and setting mean everything. And so, one, it's not a secret. Two, it's not you setting whatever it is that you're going into. It's you working with somebody else. But I think that the major issue is you just can't make it a secret, and you've got to work with somebody that does know how to create set and setting. The good thing is, early in sobriety, especially, that ego function has to get shrunk, and so your fifth step is doing that. But also, I do know that ketamine can help that as well in certain circumstances. So I'm not saying this is a cure for everybody, but I do have a friend that owns a treatment center, and I'm talking with her about whether or not we can do a double-blind trial to see whether or not continuous sobriety is affected by people having ketamine throughout their month in treatment, or 60 days, and those that don't. And I think that's a good way of approaching things. But you knowing that it's potentially dangerous, asking about it, and then making sure that you're in a set and setting that is healthy, I think that's all very important stuff going in with the disease that we have. And it's a disease.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Also, Evan, there are several folks here in the audience that have experienced metis, and I'd like to give them at least some opportunity to
Sure.
kind of share what
Absolutely.
what they have about it.
Yeah. Let's.
Well, I'm
pass the
holding the mic, and I've done
there
it.
you are.
And
Okay.
my name's Amy Edwards, and I'm Justin's partner who just spoke. And thank you, Sheila. It's meant a lot to me, and it came at a divine timing, as it does. And I think Evan said the same thing. It came in a transitional period for you, and it did for me as well when Justin was relapsed and then continuing into treatment. So I was dealing with some very profound, deep issues about my own self-trust and leaning into a higher power. And it was, it's funny how you don't remember right afterward, you think you're having all these massive, epiphanies, and then you can't quite remember what happened. But you were so strong at helping guide those moments, and from the beginning to the end, and even afterward. And your follow-up was so good. And I was deeply appreciative of that. I would highly recommend you to anyone. And it was about the set and setting, because I am experienced with ketamine in a clinical setting. So, and non-clinical too. And so, yeah. Anyway, so that was really interesting to be experienced and then have your experience, which was intentional and much more spiritually inclined, which I really that speaks to my heart. That's how I do things. And so being in my own bed, I did it in my own house, in my own bed, and felt very safe and relaxed. And it was just so easy. And I'm always completely terrified before going into any psychedelic experience. And so you helped ease that. And I wasn't as terrified. I was still terrified, but I did it. And it was just really profound. And I spaced mine out a little bit more just because I like a little more integration, and that worked for my situation. So I know you do it different ways with different people, but you were very willing to work with what worked for me, and you listened really well. And I found it really interesting how much you get out of the session, which I thought maybe you could speak to just for a moment too.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And I mean, sitting right here on this floor, I mean, I remember an experience with Evan. I don't think that, so I'll just say this, is that there is a backwash with me in providing that container, while you, Evan, Julie, Brooke, Jake, all of you, there is a backwash of serenity that goes with the experience. And that's why, for me, it's so important to sit there at the bedside. You know, I watch respirations, you know, I try to monitor, what I can see for heart rate. But the main thing is that I get a sense also of something different in the room. Now, I'm not one to see different patterns and things like that, but what I have been able to see lately with some folks are some different auras. And so, I mean, that's not something that I have been gifted with, but I mean, it's just so plain. And so I'm really learning as we go as well, but there's a backwash. The other thing is that I worked with two people today in the same house. And what I can tell you is that we did it in different bedrooms. I was able to move between one and the other. But the thing is that as I left that house had a different feel to it than when we started this. And so I think that container stays. Evan and I did it right over here in this space, in this place still feels safe and sacred in a certain way. Me knowing what went on in here.
Yeah.
So I think that's right, Amy. And so I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, it's very cool. Thank you
Okay.
again.
Yeah.
Who else?
Two things I want to talk about. The first is about the house feeling different after you're doing the treatments. My mom passed away about 5 years ago. My dad just a month ago. And when I went to go visit my dad, during the funeral, walking around the home, it was different. It was more like visiting a museum of some celebrity. It was like the things didn't have any energy or any resonance or presence anymore. It was powerful.
Yep.
They were gone, and the house was just things. So I just wanted to talk to you about that. It was a very profound moment.
Wow.
There is an energy.
Yeah.
But one of the questions I want to talk to you about is a lot of substances heal people. And Native American and indigenous people around the world have always combined those substances with ritual in some way. And through all this talk, I've been noticing you going back to ritual in some way being effective as the connective tissue between ketamine, you, and the person getting the healing. So I want to see if you could talk a little bit about ritual and your treatment.
Thanks, Jay. Jay and Kirsten. Kirsten have been a part of my team that got me up off the ground. Jay created the website and has done all of the digital work. Kirsten has busted her butt in getting this message out there. She was Linklater's operations person for 15 years and is now out on her own and is a dynamo in this realm. So both of you, but Kirsten also has experienced this. Here's what my take is on that, Jay, and I think it's an important thing that says something about our culture. We don't have any of those rituals that get us through those different parts of life built into our culture. You know, we've got high school football, we've got the NFC and AFC championship game, and some, you know, we've got sports, and we've got church, but we don't have anything that we can kind of agree on as far as rituals that celebrate change of life points. Puberty is one. And so in those indigenous populations, you know, they made a big deal out of it when a woman had her first period, when a boy was virile. They celebrated that. You know, the same thing with death. I mean, death was a celebration. And so what I think that some of what we're doing with the psychedelics, if we're doing it in the right way and it's offered in the right way, that we can offer transitions to be more acceptable at a deep level. And these things were not things that worked consciously, they worked unconsciously. And so I think those, you know, the indigenous population knew that at some deep level and honored that. So, you know, when we think about the archetypal forces that shape what we're doing, you know, we've given up the fact that the myth that people lived by for millennia, we've said those don't mean much to us. So we find in different sorts of images the impact that makes those things important, but we've forgotten what they mean to collect. So, I mean, we don't have the gods that the Greeks did. There was a god for everything. But the thing is that they made something conscious from the unconscious. You know, then we had saints. You know, all the saints, you go to, I lived in Italy for years, and I mean, on every street corner there was a saint. And there were reasons for that, but the sacred was contained in a space, and it helped in life transitions. That's why you'd see 100 women and men and women going to mass every morning. So those things have lost their compelling capacity. And what I think is very important, if we're going to do this the right way, we've got to have a set and setting that honors ritual, because it honors the conscious and unconscious. And whatever we want to call it, whether or not it's saints or gods or dream patterns, now we're finding it in a millennia of images. I mean, why do we think that movies have gotten to be such an impactful thing? You know, Dune, those images are there. But I mean, everybody's watched Star Wars. It's the same stories. It's the same thing. It's patterns. It's archetypal patterns being told in a different way. So we've got to help people, I think, with the psychedelics, offer us a way to move into that space if it's done in the right way. So thanks. And I'm sorry about your father, but, I know, and I told you this before you left, that he's certainly proud. He's got to be proud of you. So.
And this type of interaction is a ritual in itself. You know, it's the oldest and one that we've stayed true to is storytelling. Like you're talking about those archetypes and different approaches and exchange of patterns. Like storytelling is one way that we can check in with each other and truly listen to one another, and that opens doors. And that's something that we can do daily. Another one is dance. You know, dancing is, so healthy for the soul, and then community, and all of those things I think are super essential. And I see people going back towards that. Again, post-pandemic, we had that removed, and now, I see people really yearning for community and wanting to create that with the right values and boundaries and everything. And so I think a lot of people will step up and do that for themselves on a more personal level. Any other questions? Corey, come on, man. I know you got one. Be thinking of one.
This stretches far? Okay, cool. So something I'm really curious about, so this is kind of a multi-layered question, is I'd love to know, being in Texas, of all states, the pushback you're getting doing this treatment, like what the setting's like, doing something like that, where I don't know how it's regulated here and I don't know how strict it is, and I would love to know in follow-up how people can support and maybe get involved in making this, more readily accessible and easier to find, because you don't hear about this as often, especially here in Texas where the, drug regulations are pretty strict. So I'd love to know about that experience for you.
Well, I think that's what we're doing right here.
Yeah.
This isn't something that the way that I'm offering it, particularly as an individual, is not something that a lot of people perhaps, well, I'm not going to get rich doing this. Let me just tell you that. But the thing is that it's word of mouth. That's the first thing. The other thing is that the internet provides us, and that's why we're here with Evan, is trying to let people know what's out there. I think the best thing that we can do is tell one another, what our experiences are. The people that are here in the room, though, that have experienced Metis, with me providing it, I think those spaces get cleaned out in a way. Julie, Kirsten, I think something changes once you do something of that magnitude in a space. And so I think that's just the other part of it, is just being aware that that's what has happened and honoring that in a certain way. But the thing is that, this is a wildfire. It's not going to stop. It started. And so the only question is, how do we help people use this and treat this wonderful opportunity in the right way? And it's just us sharing stories like this. You go, somebody at coffee tomorrow, saying, I had a talk about Metis and ketamine last night. Let me tell you what I found. And, that's the way things go in our world these days. So I think it's a matter of getting good publicity in the right way. I think it's a matter, though, of setting a way that it's the most helpful. And the other thing is that once you are involved with that setting as a ritual, then honoring that space is something sacred. Mm-hmm. And I think those hits different levels for all of us, but I think they're important. So thanks.
Yeah,
that's
awesome.
A good question.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Down here.
Yeah, just thanks again to you both for having this conversation. It's an important conversation to have, and I know everyone here is appreciative of that. I wanted to touch on something that Evan mentioned, and that's just grace. It seems like any ketamine, anyone who's had a ketamine experience, they have their own individual experience. It looks different for everyone, but it seems like that's something that just about everyone comes back to. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on maybe why that is, or the theory behind that, of the place people are reaching to find this newfound grace that is a new feeling, a new emotion.
And the first part of your question was, what was it that?
Well, just when Evan mentioned it, it just reminded me. It reminded me of just my own first experience of a childhood trauma, and one of the first questions, or one of the questions that was asked was, seeing that person.
Yeah.
How did you feel seeing that person? And it was a big smile, and it was just, I felt her pain. I felt pain that she's had, and that was really unfortunate that she was carrying that. And that that's a level of grace that I never even could have imagined having. And it seems like through personal connections, through reading stories of others who have gone through ketamine experiences, grace is common among just about everyone that I've seen. And so I don't know if that's similar in from what you've seen. And then, I would just love to hear your thoughts on kind of why that may be and what people are coming to find that.
That's a great question. I don't think there's a way to predict what happens between you and it. And I've been fooled a couple of times, especially with folks that I thought would drop down immediately. And that was my experience, is that, all of a sudden I heard a voice say, if you're going to go any further, you've got to give up an idea of who you think you are. And all I remember, somebody had said, I say yes. So I said yes, and I went in, and I dropped down. So as far as meeting people in which there needs to be something diffused, as long as seeing something from the past that heals some trauma, that's the grace that I think we're talking about. That's what actually moves the thing. And I don't think you can predict that. Now, I think set and setting makes a lot of difference. And I do think that understanding what the typology is, because of what we talked about, soul out or soul in, can help in kind of preparing people for what they may see. Somebody here in this room told me after their first journey that, I was on the outside looking in, and I wanted to get in. So again, that's a comment that either I needed to give more the next time, or it just wasn't time. And so that's what I am helping people with now. If after 3 of these that they haven't seen anything, it's black, it's dark, and I haven't seen anybody have that happen, but if it did, I would just be able to tell them, look, Metis just doesn't think it's time for you to do this yet. And so I think that's the other part of it, is that there's such great mystery with it. But the odd thing is that for a majority of the people that I'm working with, that the synchronicity of what would heal you, what needs to be healed, gets healed. I mean, that's the incredible thing. How out of 1 billion images could that happen, that you found that one person that you needed to have an amends with in order to make your life go on? How could you find that space in which, something, some old trauma was healed? I don't know. But that's the great mystery, and I think we need to move with that. So, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. So, yes, just like everybody here, thank you for you guys having these conversations and starting this path, because it's amazing. So I love how you referenced typology and Carl Jung and all that stuff. I myself am also a certified practitioner for the MBTI and everything. And so I guess the question is, what is the depth that you go into it in the therapeutic process, and how much kind of self-realization are you incorporating into that with personality type, extrovert, introvert, sensing, feeling, all those different things for the self-realization of, let's say, the client or the person going through the therapy?
It's funny. I'm working with somebody that I was at Pacifica, was an instructor in typology. Carol Shoemate has written with John Beebe, wrote the 8-step personality method, and so it's fresh off, but she was a wonderful instructor, and so I'm writing a paper for publication in her journal, and we were talking about exactly this today. So the thing is that there's, the idea that something in the psyche could be tracked to a level that something medication-wise can affect that, and that an image would come up and you know where you are. That is incredible. But I mean, we're just at the start of that. So it's you that will come up with the patterns of how do we help people integrate that. And I'm just at the start of this. I don't know how to help people integrate the images that they bring back up. But but what I'm really beginning to feel is that especially those that drop way down, that they drop into that lowest level, to the eighth function, in which they have no idea from an unconscious perspective that they have anything to do with that, and they bring up an image that shows that. So if I can help those people in some way in the future with some sort of ritual to help connect to that and let them know what it is that we're connecting to on that archetypal level, that's where I think we're headed. And you're right in the middle of where all of this is going to head. So the levels, the archetypal levels that we're talking about based on functions are what we're going to be taking images back from and trying to figure out what sort of psychic terrain we're dealing with.
So when you're mentioning images, are you referring to like what's happening during the process of the therapy, and then?
No, not alone. I mean, because I have people pay great attention to their dreams before and after. I think Amy Edwards had a dream before one of our sessions that was just amazing, in that it pointed the direction in which she was headed. So I ask people to keep a dream journal, so I think that it comes from active imagination. I think it comes from dreams, and I think that it comes from, in my own experience, those waking visions that you can't explain. But the thing is having somebody that they can go to and talk to about it, and help them try to understand in their own way what they're doing is important.
Connecting it to the archetype. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, if you don't feel it, if you don't understand it, and Jung said this. Jung said you can't get through that fourth function consciously. You've just got to work around it. So you've got to just kind of circumambulate that in a certain way. And I think that's what, therapists do, is that they keep pointing that mirror back. Okay, well, what do you see here? What do you see there? And what do you see there? So, there's no magic to it. It's a matter of people telling stories to other people and helping them point the way in a container that's full of compassion. And so I think all of those things are supported by what we're offering here. It's just another tool to get down deep.
And patience.
Does that help?
Be patient. Yeah. Anybody else? Anything pressing? All right. Well, if that's it, we'll wrap it up. Sheila, I want to thank you so much for coming on, and yeah, I think it's incredibly inspiring to see how you're showing up in the world and continue to, and have all your life. And I think there'll be many more in this room that'll touch others and, ask more of themselves to heal and to ask each other how they can serve the world. And that's where the magic's at. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having this.
Absolutely. So make sure y'all connect with Sheila and FindingMetis. Okay. And for those online, go to the website and check out what's next. Cool. All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.